The guards were already moving before the warden spoke. It was 2 a.m. inside a federal penitentiary in Illinois, and the prison was asleep, except for one man who wasn't going to sleep here much longer. Inmate Raymond Razor Delgado, once a feared enforcer for a major cartel, sat handcuffed in a small interview room. He wasn't wearing the usual orange jumpsuit tonight. Instead, he had on a plain gray sweatshirt and jeans, clothes chosen for one reason: they wouldn't stand out when he left the facility in the back of an unmarked van. "Ready?" an FBI agent asked. Delgado nodded. His hands shook slightly, but not from fear of the agents. What terrified him was what might happen if anyone in the prison found out what he had just done. 3 hours earlier, Delgado had signed a cooperation agreement with the U.S. government. He had agreed to testify against his own cartel, men he had once called brothers, in exchange for a reduced sentence and eventual entry into witness protection. And what he had given them was explosive: names, bank accounts, drug routes, safe houses, even corrupt officials on the payroll. "This will bring down the biggest case we've ever built," one prosecutor whispered as they reviewed Delgado's information. But if word of his betrayal got out before they moved him, Delgado knew he wouldn't survive the night. What Delgado had just done, flipping from inmate to informant, was one of the most dangerous decisions a prisoner can make. Inside, snitches are despised, hunted, and often killed. But outside, they can change the course of entire federal investigations. And Delgado's betrayal was about to reshape America's war on one of the most violent cartels in the world. As the van pulled away into the darkness, Delgado looked back through the barred window. He knew this might be the last time he ever saw the inside of that prison, or the outside world, as himself. But Delgado's story wasn't the first, nor would it be the last. For decades, prison informants have played a hidden but critical role in dismantling some of the most dangerous criminal empires in America, from drug cartels and biker gangs to mafia families and domestic terror networks. It's a secret world built on desperation, betrayal, and survival. And to understand it, we have to rewind the clock, to a man whose cooperation inside prison didn't just change one case. It changed the entire FBI's approach to organized crime. His name was Salvatore "Sammy the Bull" Gravano. Gravano was no ordinary inmate. He was the underboss of the Gambino crime family, one of New York's most powerful mafia organizations. 4 years, he had been John Gotti's right-hand man, his enforcer, his fixer, his confidant. Gravano had ordered hits, negotiated drug deals, and run extortion rackets worth millions. But by 1991, Gotti and Gravano were both sitting behind bars, indicted on a mountain of charges. The FBI's case was strong, but not airtight. Gotti's lawyers were some of the best in the country, and the Teflon Don had beaten charges before. That's when Gravano did the unthinkable. He flipped. Sitting in a secure federal facility, Gravano agreed to testify against his own boss. In exchange, prosecutors promised him a drastically reduced sentence and entry into witness protection. His testimony was devastating. Gravano described Gotti's leadership of the Gambino family in vivid detail: the murders, the meetings, the code of silence. His words ripped apart the defense's case. In 1992, John Gotti was convicted on 13 counts, including murder and racketeering. He was sentenced to life in prison. The mob world was stunned. A man who had once sworn a blood oath of loyalty had betrayed the most powerful don in America, from inside prison walls. But the FBI wasn't done. Gravano's cooperation opened the floodgates. Within months, other mobsters followed. One by one, long-standing mafia families began to unravel as insiders turned government witnesses to save themselves. And soon, prosecutors realized something: prison wasn't the end of an investigation, it was just the beginning. The FBI's use of inmate informants grew rapidly through the 1990s and early 2000s. Some of the most significant drug, gang, and terrorism cases of the era hinged on prisoners flipping against their organizations. One of the most dramatic examples came from inside the walls of a federal prison in Colorado. There, a man named Victor Alvarez, once a lieutenant for a Mexican drug cartel, was serving a 35-year sentence. Alvarez had been arrested in a massive DEA operation targeting a smuggling network that moved cocaine from Colombia through Mexico into the United States. 4 years, he kept quiet, refusing every deal the government offered. But after a brutal attack inside the prison left him hospitalized, Alvarez decided he wanted out. He approached federal agents with an offer: he would reveal the cartel's money-laundering network, a complex web of shell companies and offshore accounts worth billions, in exchange for protection and a sentence reduction. At first, agents were skeptical. But as Alvarez began producing detailed records, names, and even hand-drawn maps of cartel operations, they realized what they had. His information triggered a series of raids across Miami, Houston, and Los Angeles. It led to dozens of indictments, the seizure of over $700 million in cartel assets, and the arrest of several high-ranking members who had evaded capture for years. All because one man in a cell decided to talk. But cooperation comes with a cost. Once an inmate flips, they are marked. News spreads fast inside prison walls, and snitches are targets. They are moved into protective custody, often spending 23 hours a day in isolation to avoid retaliation. Even then, they live under constant threat. "I sleep with my shoes on," Alvarez later told investigators. "If someone gets to me, I want to be ready to run." And the danger doesn't end when they leave prison. Many informants enter the Federal Witness Protection Program, assuming new identities and disappearing into small towns far from their former lives. They cut ties with family, abandon their past, and live with the knowledge that someone might still come looking for them. Yet, despite the risks, the pipeline of prison informants never stops. Some do it for freedom. Some for revenge. Some simply because they have nothing left to lose. But every so often, one informant's decision changes more than just a case. It changes history. And that's exactly what happened in 2010, when a low-level gang member in a federal prison in Pennsylvania made a choice that would lead the FBI straight into the heart of one of the most powerful drug cartels in the world. His name was Marcus "Trigger" Hill, and his decision to cooperate would spark one of the largest international investigations in U.S. history, one that reached all the way into the leadership of the Sinaloa Cartel. What Marcus knew, and what he was about to reveal, would expose a global criminal network worth billions, and prove once again how one man behind bars can turn the entire justice system upside down. The day Marcus Hill made the decision that would change everything was a Tuesday, ordinary for most of the prison, but life-altering for him. It was just after breakfast inside USP Lewisburg, a high-security federal penitentiary in Pennsylvania, when Marcus sat alone on the edge of his bunk, staring at a smuggled newspaper clipping. The headline read, "DA expands hunt for Sinaloa Cartel's U.S. operations." He read it over and over. For most inmates, it was just another headline. For Marcus, it was a door, one that could lead out of the cell he'd been in for nearly a decade. At 34, Marcus was serving a 35-year sentence for federal drug trafficking and weapons charges. He had been a mid-level player for a small East Coast gang connected to the Sinaloa Cartel. Most of what he did before his arrest was small-time, arranging shipments, collecting payments, keeping his corner running. But behind that, Marcus had been trusted with something few others had: knowledge. He knew the names of American distributors. He knew which warehouses shipments moved through. He knew which legitimate businesses were actually cartel fronts. And, most dangerously of all, he knew the identities of two US-based money men who handled the cartel's billion-dollar drug profits. At the time, the DA had spent over 6 years trying to crack that part of the cartel's operation, and gotten nowhere. Marcus realized that knowledge could be his ticket out. He didn't make the decision lightly. In prison culture, there is nothing lower than a snitch. If word got out that Marcus was cooperating, he wouldn't survive a week. But staying silent meant dying behind bars. So one night, after lockdown, he scribbled a short note on a piece of lined paper and handed it to a correctional officer he trusted. "I have information about the Sinaloa Cartel. I want to talk." Within 48 hours, 2 DA agents and a federal prosecutor were sitting across from him in a secure interview room. Marcus didn't speak right away. He sat still, weighing his words. Then he said quietly, "I know how they're getting the money out." At first, the agents were skeptical. They'd heard plenty of false leads from inmates looking for sentence reductions. But as Marcus began laying out details, specific names, routes, businesses, even account numbers, their skepticism turned into focused silence. One of the names he mentioned, a seemingly ordinary freight company in Newark, New Jersey, had already appeared in a handful of DA surveillance reports but had never been connected to cartel activity. Marcus explained that the company was a front for laundering tens of millions of dollars in cocaine profits. He even described the exact process, how cash was broken down into smaller shipments, mixed with legitimate invoices, and wired overseas through shell corporations. What Marcus told them was more than gossip. It was a roadmap. In the months that followed, Marcus became one of the DA's most valuable assets. He met with agents repeatedly under strict secrecy. He provided them with nicknames and code words used in encrypted messages. He identified corrupt customs officials who helped shipments move through ports undetected. And he drew diagrams of how drug money traveled from street corners in Philadelphia to shell companies in Panama and Hong Kong. Bit by bit, the pieces started to come together. Operation Coldstream, as it was called, grew into one of the most ambitious investigations in the agency's history. What started with one inmate's information turned into a multi-agency task force involving the DEA, FBI, IRS, and Department of Homeland Security. Surveillance teams were deployed in 6 U.S. cities. Wiretaps were approved. Undercover agents began infiltrating suspected businesses. And it worked. In 2012, federal agents raided the Newark freight company Marcus had identified. Inside, they found $47 million in laundered drug money hidden in false shipping manifests and phony contracts. A month later, 2 more raids in Miami and Dallas turned up another $120 million in cartel-linked funds. For the first time, investigators were seeing the financial backbone of the Sinaloa Cartel's U.S. operation. And it all traced back to the information from one man sitting in a prison cell. But Marcus's role was far from over. In late 2012, federal prosecutors approached him with a risky proposal: go undercover inside the prison to get more intelligence. Specifically, they wanted him to befriend another inmate, Alejandro L. Dr. Ramos, a high-ranking cartel lieutenant awaiting extradition. Ramos was believed to have direct contact with Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, the cartel's notorious leader. If Marcus could get him talking, the information could blow the case wide open. It was a dangerous assignment. If Ramos suspected anything, Marcus would be dead before guards could reach him. But Marcus agreed. Over the next several months, Marcus slowly built a relationship with Ramos, playing chess with him in the yard, trading commissary items, talking about old drug runs. Little by little, Ramos opened up. One day, he bragged about a hidden stash house in Chicago, a safe location where cash was funneled before being shipped abroad. Marcus memorized the address. On another day, Ramos mentioned a man known only as El Contador, the accountant who managed the cartel's U.S. books. Every scrap of information Marcus gathered was quietly relayed to his handlers. And each detail helped federal agents tighten the net. By 2014, Operation Coldstream culminated in a series of coordinated raids across the country. Agents stormed stash houses in Chicago, Houston, and Los Angeles. They seized over $350 million in assets, arrested 74 cartel members, and indicted several top-tier operatives, including El Contador himself. The investigation also disrupted one of the cartel's largest U.S. distribution networks, reducing cocaine shipments by nearly 40% within 2 years. And it all began with one note slipped under a guard's door. Marcus Hill's cooperation didn't just shorten his sentence. It reshaped how federal agencies viewed prison intelligence. His case became a model for how inmate informants could help dismantle powerful criminal networks from the inside. But it also exposed the risks. Word of Marcus's cooperation eventually leaked. He was moved into protective custody and later entered the Federal Witness Security Program under a new identity. Even today, years after his release, he lives under a different name in a small town far from the East Coast. And he is not alone. Across the country, hundreds of inmates have made similar choices, some against cartels, others against white-collar conspiracies, domestic terror groups, or organized crime families. Their testimonies have solved cold cases, prevented murders, and crippled billion-dollar empires. But not every story ends with freedom. Some snitches never make it out. Some vanish after release. And some live knowing a target is still on their back. Yet, despite the danger, the pipeline of inmate intelligence continues, shaping the future of law enforcement and redefining what justice looks like from inside a cell. And nowhere was that more evident than in one of the most dramatic betrayals in modern American crime, a betrayal that didn't just expose a gang or a cartel, but took down a corrupt politician and reshaped federal sentencing laws forever. That story begins with a man named Anthony Tony Two Times Russo, a career criminal whose cooperation would spark one of the biggest political scandals in modern U.S. history.